The wind howled like a wild animal as Lisa fought her way through the snow. Each step felt like walking through thick mud, and the cold cut through her thin jacket like knives. Her old car had finally given up on her 20 miles back, leaving her stranded on this empty Montana road with nothing but the clothes on her back and a dying phone battery. She'd been walking for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 30 minutes. Her fingers had gone numb and she couldn't feel her toes anymore. The smart thing would have been to stay with the car and wait for help, but Lisa knew better. Help wasn't coming. Nobody knew where she was, and that's exactly how she'd wanted it when she left California 3 days ago. Now, as snowflakes stung her face and her vision started to blur, she wondered if running away had been the biggest mistake of her life. Maybe dying out here in the middle of nowhere was what she deserved. Maybe this was how her story was supposed to end. But then, through the wall of white snow, she saw something that made her heart jump. Lights. Warm, yellow lights cutting through the darkness like a beacon of hope. At first, she thought her frozen brain was playing tricks on her. But as she stumbled closer, the lights became clearer, and she could make out the shape of a huge house sitting on top of a small hill. It wasn't just any house. This place was massive, with tall windows glowing from inside and a long driveway that probably cost more than most people's cars. Even through her exhaustion and fear, Lisa could tell this was the home of someone very wealthy. The kind of person who lived in a different world than she did. Her first instinct was to turn around and keep walking. What would someone like her be doing at a place like this? Rich people didn't want strangers showing up at their door, especially not strangers who looked like they'd been sleeping in their car for 3 days. But the cold was getting worse, and she could feel her body starting to shut down. Pride wouldn't keep her alive, but shelter might. Lisa forced her frozen legs to carry her up the long driveway. Each step was harder than the last, and by the time she reached the front door, she was barely standing. The door was huge and made of dark wood with fancy glass panels. Even the doorbell looked expensive. She raised her hand to knock, but her arm felt like it weighed 100 pounds. The first knock was so weak she could barely hear it herself. She tried again, harder this time, and the sound echoed inside the tier house. Nothing happened. Panic started to set in as she realized she might not have the strength for many more tries. Using both fists, she pounded on the door as hard as she could manage. "Please," she whispered to nobody in particular. "Please, someone be home." Footsteps. Heavy footsteps coming toward the door from inside. Lisa felt a mix of relief and terror as she heard locks being turned. What was she going to say? How could she explain why she was here without telling the whole truth? The door swung open, and Lisa found herself looking up at a man who seemed to take up the entire doorway. He was tall and broad-shouldered, probably in his early 40s, with dark hair that was starting to go gray at the temples. He wore jeans and a thick sweater, and his boots looked like they'd seen plenty of hard work, despite the obvious wealth of his home. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. They were dark brown and cautious, but not unkind. Right now, those eyes were wide with surprise as he took in the sight of her standing on his doorstep, covered in snow and shaking like a leaf. "Good Lord," he said, his voice deep and rough around the edges. "What are you doing out here?" Lisa opened her mouth to answer, but all that came out was a strange croaking sound. She realized she was shivering so hard she could barely speak. The man stepped closer, and she could see the concern growing on his face. "You're freezing," he said, more to himself than to her. "How long have you been walking?" "My car," Lisa managed to get out between chattering teeth, "broke down. I've been walking for—" She couldn't finish the sentence because her legs finally gave out. The man caught her before she hit the ground, his strong arms wrapping around her as everything started to go black around the edges. "Whoa there," he said, lifting her easily. "I've got you. You're safe now." Lisa wanted to tell him that she'd never been safe, that she didn't even know what that word meant anymore. But the warmth from his body and the security of being held by someone who seemed genuinely concerned made her feel something she hadn't felt in months: hope. He carried her inside, and the difference in temperature hit her like a physical blow. The house was beautifully warm, with thick carpets and furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine. But more than that, it felt like a home. There were pictures on the walls, books scattered around, and the smell of something cooking. In the kitchen. "Let's get you warmed up," the man said, carrying her toward what looked like a living room with a huge fireplace. A real fire was crackling away, sending dancing shadows across the walls. He set her down carefully on a leather couch that was probably worth more than everything she owned. "Don't move," he said, disappearing for a moment before coming back, with an armload of thick blankets. He wrapped them around her gently like she was something fragile that might break. "Better?" Lisa nodded, though she was still shaking. The man knelt down in front of her, studying her face with those careful brown eyes. "I'm Tom," he said simply. "Tom Wilson. This is my ranch. What's your name?" "Lisa," she whispered. "Lisa Chen." "Well, Lisa Chen, you picked a hell of a night to be out walking." Tom's voice had a slight accent that suggested he'd grown up somewhere in the South. "Your car really broke down?" She nodded again. "About 20 miles back, I think. Maybe more. I've been walking for a while." Tom frowned. 20 miles? In this weather? You could have died out there." "I know," Lisa said quietly. And the truth was, part of her had wondered if that might not be such a bad thing. But sitting here in this warm room, wrapped in soft blankets, while a stranger showed her more kindness than she'd received in years, that dark thought seemed very far away. "You got anyone I can call?" Tom asked. "Family? Friends? Someone who's worried about you?" Lisa felt her chest tighten. This was the question she'd been dreading. "No," she said, and it was mostly true. "There's nobody." Tom's expression softened even more. "Well, you're stuck here until this storm passes anyway. Roads won't be clear until tomorrow at the earliest, maybe longer. You hungry?" As if her body had been waiting for permission, Lisa's stomach chose that moment to growl loudly. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten a real meal. Gas station snacks and drive-through coffee had been her diet for the past 3 days. Tom smiled for the first time since opening the door, and it completely changed his face. The cautious, serious expression melted away, replaced by something warm and genuine. "I'll take that as a yes. You just stay put and get warm. I'll bring you something hot." He started to leave, then turned back. "Lisa, you're safe here, okay? Whatever brought you out on a night like this, whatever you're running from, you're safe here." The words hit her harder than she'd expected. When was the last time someone had told her she was safe? When was the last time she'd believed it? She wanted to tell him that safety was an illusion, that nowhere was really safe for someone like her. But looking around this warm, comfortable room, listening to the fire crackle and the wind howl outside, she found herself wanting to believe him. As Tom disappeared into what she assumed was the kitchen, Lisa pulled the blankets tighter around herself and tried to process what had just happened. She'd been prepared to die in that storm, and instead she'd stumbled into what felt like a different world entirely. A world where strangers helped each other, where people had enough money to heat rooms this big, where someone could look at a frozen, desperate woman on their doorstep and invite her in without asking too many questions. She closed her eyes and listened to the sounds of Tom moving around in the kitchen. Pots and pans, a microwave beeping, the refrigerator opening and closing. Normal, domestic sounds that reminded her of a life she'd never really had. A life where people cooked real meals and sat by fireplaces and didn't have to look over their shoulders every few minutes. The warmth was starting to seep into her bones, and for the first time in days, Lisa felt her muscles begin to relax. Maybe she would just rest here for a few minutes, just until the storm passed. Then she'd figure out what to do next, where to go, how to disappear again. But for now, wrapped in expensive blankets by a crackling fire while a kind stranger made her food, Lisa allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to stop running, what it might be like to be safe. Lisa woke up to the smell of bacon and coffee. For a moment she forgot where she was and panic shot through her. Then she remembered the storm, the walk, Tom's warm house. She was still on the couch, covered in those soft blankets, and mourning. Light was streaming through the tall windows. The storm had passed, but when she looked outside, all she could see was white. Snow covered everything as far as her eyes could reach. The driveway she'd stumbled up last night was completely buried, and the road beyond was invisible under at least 3 feet of fresh powder. "Good. You're awake." Tom's voice came from behind her, and she turned to see him walking in with a steaming mug. He looked different in the daylight, more relaxed, wearing a flannel shirt and worn jeans that somehow made him seem both rugged and approachable. "Coffee?" "Thank you," Lisa said, accepting the mug gratefully. The coffee was perfect, strong and hot, with just a hint of sweetness. "I should probably get going soon." Tom raised an eyebrow and gestured toward the window. "Not unless you've got a snowplow hidden somewhere. That storm dropped 4 feet on us, and the county won't get the roads cleared for at least 2 days. Maybe 3. Lisa felt her stomach drop. She'd planned to be long gone by now, to put more distance between herself and her past, but looking at all that snow, she knew Tom was right. She was trapped here whether she liked it or not. "I can pay you," she said quickly. "For letting me stay, I mean. I don't have much, but I can give you something." Tom held up a hand. "Don't worry about that. Nobody should have to pay for basic human kindness." He sat down in a chair across from her, cradling his own coffee mug. "Though I am curious about what brought you out here in the first place. California plates on that car of yours, right?" Lisa tensed. She'd hoped he hadn't noticed the license plate. "How did you—" "Saw it yesterday when I went out to check on the animals. Had to dig it out a bit to make sure." Tom's tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp. "Long way from home?" "Not home anymore," Lisa said quietly. "I was just traveling." "In December? Through Montana? In a car that old?" Tom didn't sound accusatory, just puzzled. "That's either very brave or very desperate." Lisa stared into her coffee, not sure how to answer. "Both," she thought. "Definitely both." "Look," Tom continued, his voice gentler now. "I'm not trying to pry, but I've been around long enough to recognize someone who's running from something, and I've got enough experience with people in trouble to know that sometimes talking helps." There was something about his tone, about the way he sat there patiently waiting, that made Lisa want to tell him everything. About the controlling relationship she'd finally escaped. About the threats that had driven her to pack everything she owned into her old car and drive until she ran out of money. About the fear that followed her everywhere, making her jump at shadows and sleep with one eye open. But she'd learned the hard way that trusting people was dangerous, even people who seemed kind. "I had some problems back home," she said finally. "Needed a fresh start somewhere new." Tom nodded like that explained everything. "Fair enough. We all got things we'd rather leave behind." He took a sip of his coffee. "You got anywhere particular in mind for that fresh start?" Lisa realized she didn't. She'd been so focused on getting away that she'd never really thought about where she was going. "Not really. I was just driving." "Well, you're welcome to stay here until the road's clear. After that, we'll figure something out." Tom stood up, stretching. "You hungry? I made way too much breakfast." The kitchen was as impressive as the rest of the house, all granite counters and stainless steel appliances that looked like they belonged in a restaurant. But despite all the fancy equipment, it felt warm and lived in. There were coffee stains on the counter, a stack of newspapers by the window, and the kind of comfortable mess that suggested someone actually cooked here regularly. Tom had made enough food for 4 people: bacon, eggs, pancakes, hash browns, and fresh fruit. Lisa couldn't remember the last time she'd seen so much food in one place. "Are you expecting company?" she asked. Tom laughed. "Habit, I guess. I'm used to feeding ranch hands. Sometimes I forget I'm cooking for one." He paused, looking a little embarrassed. "Truth is, it gets pretty quiet around here. Nice to have someone to cook for." As they ate, Lisa learned more about Tom and his life. He'd inherited the ranch from his father 5 years ago, along with enough money to run it without worrying about profit. He had about 50 head of cattle, a few horses, and more land than he knew what to do with. He'd been married once, but his wife had died in a car accident 3 years earlier. She hated it out here, Tom said, staring out the window at the snow-covered fields. Always said it was too quiet, too isolated. Wanted to move to Denver or maybe back east where her family was. I kept telling her we'd talk about it next year, or the year after that. Always next year. He shook his head. Funny how you think you've got all the time in the world until you don't. Lisa could hear the regret in his voice, the weight of words, left unsaid and plans never made. She knew something about regret. I'm sorry, she said softly. Thanks, it's getting easier slowly, but the house feels pretty empty most days. Tom turned back to her with a slight smile. Which is why it's nice to have someone to talk to, even if it's just until the snow melts. After breakfast, Tom showed her around the house. It was even bigger than she'd thought. 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a game room with a pool table and old-fashioned bar. Everything was beautifully maintained but had that slightly unused feel of a house meant for a family that was now home to just one person. You keep all this clean yourself? Lisa asked as they walked through what Tom called the formal dining room, though she couldn't imagine anything formal happening in a place that felt so warm and welcoming. Tom laughed. Badly. I had a housekeeper for a while, but she quit last month. Said the commute was too long in winter, and I couldn't really argue with that. The nearest town is 40 miles away, and these roads can be pretty rough. They ended up in what Tom called his office, though it looked more like a comfortable den. There was a big wooden desk covered in papers, a leather chair that looked well-loved, and windows that faced the mountains in the distance. So what do you do when you're not rescuing frozen strangers? Lisa asked. Run cattle mostly. Fix fences, maintain equipment, worry about the weather. Tom sat down behind his desk, looking suddenly serious. It's not exciting work, but it's honest. And it keeps me busy enough that I don't think too much about how quiet it gets around here. Lisa could hear the loneliness in his voice. Carefully, hidden but still there. It was something she recognized because she'd been lonely too in a different way. Even when she'd been trapped in a relationship that was slowly destroying her, she'd been desperately lonely. I could help, she heard herself say. While I'm here, I'm pretty good at cleaning and I can cook. It's the least I can do after you saved my life. Tom looked surprised. You don't need to do that. You're a guest. I want to, Lisa said, and realized she meant it. I hate feeling useless, and it sounds like you could use the help. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, the wind had picked up again, rattling the windows and reminding them both that the rest of the world felt very far away. Actually, Tom said slowly, that's not a bad idea. Temporarily. Until you figure out what you want to do next. Temporarily, Lisa agreed, though something in her chest loosened at the thought of having a purpose again, even a small one. There's just one thing, Tom said, and suddenly he looked uncomfortable. The guest rooms are all upstairs, but the heating system up there has been acting up. It gets pretty cold at night. Lisa waited, sensing he had more to say. The master bedroom downstairs stays warm, but Tom ran a hand through his hair, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Look, this is going to sound wrong no matter how I say it, but if you're going to stay here for a few days and if you're going to help out around the house, maybe we could work out some kind of arrangement that benefits both of us. Lisa felt her heart start to beat faster. She thought she knew where this conversation was going, and part of her had been expecting it. In her experience, men always wanted something in return for their kindness. What kind of arrangement? She asked quietly. Tom looked directly at her, his brown eyes serious. I'm not good at being alone, Lisa. Haven't been since my wife died. The house is big and cold and empty, and most nights I end up falling asleep in this chair because I can't stand going to bed in that room by myself. He paused, clearly struggling with what to say next. I'm not talking about anything inappropriate, he continued quickly. I'm just talking about companionship. Someone to talk to in the evenings. Someone to make the house feel less empty. And if you're going to be cold upstairs anyway. Lisa stared at him, trying to read his expression. There was something honest about the way he was looking at her. Something vulnerable that she didn't think he showed to many people. You're asking me to share your room, she said. I'm asking you to help me feel less alone, Tom replied. in whatever way feels right to both of us. No pressure, no expectations, just company. Lisa thought about the cold guest rooms upstairs and the warm master bedroom downstairs. She thought about the first few days were awkward in the way that living with a stranger always is, even when that stranger has saved your life. Lisa kept to her side of the big bed, building a wall of pillows between them, while Tom seemed determined to take up as little space as possible. They were like two careful dancers, always aware of where the other person was, always trying not to step on each other's toes. But slowly, things began to feel more natural. Lisa discovered that Tom was an early riser who liked to check on his animals before dawn, so she started getting up early too, making coffee and breakfast so it would be ready when he came back inside with snow in his hair and stories about the cattle. Tom learned that Lisa was a night owl who liked to read by the fireplace after dinner, so he started joining her there, working on ranch paperwork while she lost herself in the books from his extensive library. The house began to feel different with two people in it. Warmer somehow, even though the temperature hadn't changed. There were voices in the hallways, laughter from the kitchen, and the comfortable sounds of two people sharing a space. Lisa found herself humming while she cleaned, something she hadn't done in years. Tom started cooking elaborate dinners, clearly enjoying having someone to impress with his surprisingly good kitchen skills. "You know," Lisa said one evening as they sat by the fire, "when you said you weren't much of a housekeeper, I thought you were being modest. But this place was actually pretty disgusting when I got here." Tom laughed, looking up from the ledger. He was balancing. "Hey, I kept the important stuff clean. Kitchen, bathroom, bedroom. Everything else was just optional." "Your definition of clean and mine are very different," Lisa said, but she was smiling. "I found 3 coffee mugs under your bed." 3. I was wondering where those went. Tom grinned sheepishly. "I'm not used to having someone around to judge my housekeeping skills." "I'm not judging. Much." Lisa curled up deeper in the chair, pulling her feet underneath her. She was wearing one of Tom's old sweaters because her own clothes were still limited to what she'd grabbed when she left California. The sweater was huge on her, but it was soft and warm and smelled like him, a mixture of soap and fresh air, and something that was just uniquely Tom. "You don't have to clean everything, you know," Tom said, setting aside his paperwork. "I know we said you'd help out, but you're doing way more than your share." "I like it," Lisa admitted. "It feels good to take care of something again, to make something better instead of just surviving." Tom studied her face in the firelight. "You want to talk about what you were surviving?" Lisa had been dreading this question, but somehow it felt easier to answer now than it had a week ago. Maybe it was the warm room and the comfortable silence between them. Maybe it was the way Tom waited patiently without pushing. Or maybe it was just that she was tired of carrying the weight of her past all by herself. "I was in a relationship that wasn't good for me," she said slowly. "For a long time, and when I finally got the courage to leave, he made it clear that he wasn't going to let me go easily." Tom's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed gentle. "He threatened you?" "Among other things." Lisa pulled the sweater tighter around herself. "I stayed longer than I should have because I didn't think I had anywhere else to go. No family, not many friends. He made sure of that." "Isolated you?" "Yeah. And when I finally left, I just drove. I had some money saved up, enough for gas, and cheap motels. I thought if I could get far enough away, maybe he'd give up and move on to someone else." "But you don't think he has?" Lisa shook her head. "Men like him don't give up. They see women as property, and they don't like it when their property walks away." Tom was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke again, his voice was serious. "Lisa, you know you're safe here, right? I meant what I said that first night." "I know." And surprisingly, she did know. Tom had had plenty of opportunities to hurt her or take advantage of her vulnerability, but he'd never even raised his voice. If anything, he seemed to go out of his way to make her feel comfortable and secure. Good. Because nobody deserves to live in fear like that. They sat in comfortable silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. Lisa found herself watching Tom's face in the firelight, noticing things she hadn't before, the way his eyes crinkled slightly when he was thinking. The small scar on his chin that she'd been curious about but hadn't asked about. The way his shoulders relaxed when he thought no one was looking, as if he carried some invisible weight that he only put down when he was alone, except he wasn't alone anymore. "Tom," she said softly, "thank you for everything. I know this arrangement is supposed to help both of us, but you've given me so much more than I've given you." Tom looked surprised. "Are you kidding? Lisa, this house was like a tomb before you got here. Now it feels like a home again. You've given me more than you know." That night, as they lay in the big bed with their careful wall of pillows between them, Lisa found herself really listening to Tom breathe. He always fell asleep quickly, like someone who was used to being tired from physical work. But sometimes, he'd make small noises in his sleep. Not quite snores, but little sounds that reminded her he was there. She'd been terrified of men for so long that she'd forgotten they could be comforting instead of threatening. Tom's presence in the bed beside her, separated by pillows and carefully maintained distance, made her feel safer than she had in years. If someone came for her in the night, she wouldn't face them alone. The thought surprised her. When had she started thinking of Tom as an ally instead of just a temporary shelter? As the days passed, their routine became more natural, and their conversations grew deeper. Tom told her about his childhood on the ranch, about learning to ride before he could walk properly, and spending summers helping his father with the cattle. He talked about his wife, Amanda, and how she'd tried so hard to love ranch life but had never quite managed it. She grew up in Denver, Tom explained one afternoon as they worked together to prepare dinner. City girl through and through. She thought living out here would be romantic, like something from a movie, all sunsets and wide open spaces. But it wasn't like that, Lisa asked, chopping vegetables while Tom seasoned a roast. It was sometimes, but it was also isolation and hard work and long winters with nobody to talk to but each other. Amanda needed people around her, parties and restaurants and museums, all the things you can't get 40 miles from the nearest town. Did you ever think about moving to the city for her? Tom was quiet for a moment. I should have. I kept thinking she'd adjust, that she'd learn to love it here the way I do. But this place was all I'd ever known. The idea of leaving felt like giving up everything I was. And now? Now I wonder if holding on to this place cost me my marriage. If I'd been willing to compromise, maybe she wouldn't have been driving to town so much. Maybe she wouldn't have been on that road when the storm hit. Lisa could hear the guilt in his voice, the weight of all those what-ifs that he'd probably been carrying for 3 years. She wanted to tell him that it wasn't his fault, that accidents happen and blame doesn't help anyone. But she knew from experience that guilt wasn't something you could logic away. Instead, she reached over and touched his arm gently. She married you knowing where you lived. That was her choice too. Tom looked down at her hand on his arm, and for a moment Lisa thought he might pull away. Instead, he covered her hand with his own. "Thanks," he said quietly. "Sometimes I forget that." It was such a small touch, but it felt like a bridge between them. After that, the physical distance they'd been so careful to maintain began to shrink naturally. Tom would brush past her in the kitchen, his hand briefly touching her back. Lisa would sit closer to him by the fire in the evenings, their knees almost touching as they read or talked. The wall of pillows in the bed got smaller each night, until finally, Lisa woke up one morning to find herself curled against Tom's side, his arm around her shoulders. For a moment she panicked, all her old fears rushing back. But Tom was still asleep, his breathing slow and even, and there was nothing threatening about the way he held her. It felt protective rather than possessive, comforting rather than controlling. She should have moved away. That would have been the smart thing, the safe thing. Instead, she let herself enjoy the warmth and security of being held by someone who cared about her well-being more than his own desires. When Tom woke up and realized how they were lying, he started to apologize, but Lisa stopped him. "It's okay," she said softly. "It's nice You sure? Lisa nodded, and something shifted between them in that moment. A new level of trust, of intimacy that went beyond their practical arrangement. From then on, they stopped pretending that they were just roommates sharing a bed out of necessity. They were two lonely people who had found comfort in each other's company, and there was nothing wrong with that. The snow finally started to melt, revealing the roads and reminding them both that Lisa's stay here was supposed to be temporary. But neither of them mentioned it. Instead, they fell into an even more comfortable routine, cooking together, working together, talking late into the night about everything and nothing. Lisa learned that Tom played guitar, though he was too modest, to play for her until she practically begged. Lisa should have known that happiness like this couldn't last. She'd been living in Tom's house for 3 weeks, and each day had felt like a gift she didn't deserve. But good things had a way of slipping through her fingers, and she should have been prepared for the inevitable crash. It started with a phone call. Tom was outside checking on a fence that had been damaged by the melting snow when his phone rang inside the house. Lisa was in the kitchen making lunch, and she could hear the phone buzzing on the counter where Tom had left it. Usually she would have ignored it, but something made her glance at the screen. The name that appeared made her blood turn to ice. David, her ex-boyfriend. The man she'd driven halfway across the country to escape. Somehow, impossibly, he had Tom's number. Lisa stared at the phone as it rang, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped the sandwich she was making. How had he found her? She'd been so careful, paying for everything in cash, avoiding main roads, staying off social media. But somehow, David had tracked her down to this remote ranch in the middle of nowhere. The phone stopped ringing, but Lisa knew it was only temporary. David wasn't the type to give up after one try. He would keep calling until someone answered. She was right. 5 minutes later, the phone rang again. Then again. Each ring felt like a hammer blow to her chest. Tom came in from outside just as the phone started ringing for the 4th time. He looked surprised to see Lisa standing frozen in the kitchen, her face white as paper. "You okay?" he asked, reaching for his phone. "I wonder who keeps calling." "Don't answer it," Lisa said quickly. Tom paused, his hand hovering over the phone. Why not? Lisa's mind raced. She could lie, make up some excuse about telemarketers or wrong numbers. But the fear in her voice would give her away, and Tom deserved better than lies. "It's him," she whispered. "David, my ex." Tom's expression hardened instantly. He looked down at the phone, which had started ringing again, and Lisa could see the anger building in his eyes. "How did he get my number?" "I don't know, I've been so careful." Lisa wrapped her arms around herself, feeling cold despite the warm kitchen. "He must have figured out where I am somehow." Tom answered the phone on the 4th ring, his voice dangerously calm. "Hello?" Lisa couldn't hear David's side of the conversation, but she could imagine his voice. Smooth, charming, reasonable. The voice that had fooled her for so long. "No, I don't know anyone by that name," Tom said, which wasn't technically a lie since Lisa had never told David her real last name. "And I don't appreciate strangers calling my private number." There was a pause, then Tom's jaw tightened. "Listen, friend, I don't know who you are or what you want, but if you call this number again, I'll be having a conversation with the sheriff about harassment. Are we clear?" Tom hung up without waiting for an answer, but Lisa could see the tension in his shoulders. The phone immediately started ringing again. This time, Tom declined the call and blocked the number. But they both knew it wouldn't be enough. If David was determined to find her, he wouldn't be stopped by a blocked phone number. "We need to call the police," Tom said, setting his phone down carefully. "File a harassment report." Lisa shook her head. "He hasn't actually done anything illegal yet. A few phone calls isn't enough for a restraining order, especially since he's calling from out of state." "Then what do you want to do?" "I should leave," Lisa said quietly. "I should have left. Weeks ago. I've put you in danger just by being here. Like hell." Tom's voice was sharp. "You're not going anywhere. This is your home now, and some creep from your past doesn't get to chase you away from it." Home. The word hit Lisa harder than she'd expected. When had she started thinking of this? Place's home? When had she stopped planning her next escape route? You don't understand, she said. David isn't just controlling, he's dangerous. He has money, connections. He won't stop until he gets what he wants. Then he's going to be disappointed, Tom said firmly. Because what he wants is someone who doesn't want him back. And that's not going to change no matter how many phone calls he makes. For the rest of the day, Lisa jumped every time the house phone rang or Tom's cell phone buzzed. But David didn't call back, which somehow made things worse. The silence felt ominous, like the calm before a storm. That evening, as they sat by, the fire trying to pretend everything was normal, Tom's sister called. Lisa had heard about Rachel before but had never spoken to her. She lived in Denver and managed some of Tom's business affairs from there. According to Tom, she was smart, successful, and extremely protective of her big brother. Hey, Rach, Tom answered, putting the call on speaker since they weren't hiding anything. What's up? Tom, we need to talk. Rachel's voice was crisp and professional, but Lisa could hear an edge to it. Is your house guest there with you? Tom glanced at Lisa, frowning. Lisa's here, yes. Why? Because I just got a very interesting phone call from a private investigator who's been asking questions about her. Questions about her real name, her background, and why she's staying with my brother. Lisa felt the blood drain from her face. A private investigator. Of course, David would hire a professional to track her down. How had she been stupid enough to think she could hide from someone with his resources? What kind of questions? Tom asked, his voice carefully neutral. The kind that suggest your girlfriend isn't who she says she is, Rachel replied. Her real name is Linda Chen, not Lisa, and she has a history with a man named David Rodriguez, who claims she stole money from him before disappearing. That's not true, Lisa said quickly, finding her voice. I never stole anything from him. Maybe not, Rachel said, her tone skeptical. But the fact remains that you lied about your name. What else have you lied about? Tom held up a hand, his expression troubled. Rachel, slow down. Let's hear Lisa's side of this. Her side? Rachel's voice rose. Tom, this woman shows up out of nowhere in the middle of a snowstorm, moves into your house, and now we find out she's using a fake name and has someone tracking her down. Doesn't that strike you as convenient? You think I planned this? Lisa asked, incredulous. You think I somehow arranged for my car to break down in a blizzard so I could seduce your brother? I think people in desperate situations do desperate things, Rachel replied coldly. And I think a wealthy widower living alone on a remote ranch would look like a pretty attractive target to someone running from their problems. The words hit Lisa like physical blows. She'd heard variations of this accusation before, that she was using her relationship with David for financial security, that she was too needy and pathetic to make it on her own. Hearing it again, especially from someone who didn't even know her, brought back all the old shame and self-doubt. That's enough, Tom said sharply. Rachel, you're out of line. Am I? Tom, I know you care about this woman, but you need to think clearly. She's been lying to you from day one. Her real name, her background, probably her reasons for being here. How can you trust someone who can't even tell you the truth about who she is? Lisa stood up abruptly, unable to listen to any more. She's right, she said quietly. I have been lying to you about my name, about why I'm really here. You deserve better than that. Lisa. Her name is Linda, Rachel interrupted. And according to the investigator, she has a pattern of getting involved with men who support her financially. Stop. Tom's voice was like ice. Rachel, I'm going to hang up now before you say something we'll both regret. Tom, wait. He ended the call and turned to Lisa, who was standing by the fire with her arms wrapped around herself. She looked small and broken, like someone who'd been expecting this moment for a long time. Is it true? He asked gently. About your name? Lisa nodded, without looking at him. My real name is Linda Chen. I started using Lisa when I left California because I thought it would be harder to track. I guess I was wrong. And the rest of it? About your history with men? That question made Lisa look up, and Tom could see tears in her eyes. David always said I was using him, that I was too weak and stupid to take care of myself, so I had to find men to do it for me. He used to tell me that all the time, especially when I tried to leave. And do you think that's true? I don't know anymore, Lisa whispered. Maybe Rachel's right. Maybe I am just someone who takes advantage of kind people. Maybe that's all I know how to do. Tom crossed the room and took her hands in his. Look at me, Linda. Lisa. Whatever name you want to use. Look at me. She met his eyes reluctantly. Do you think you're using me? I don't want to be, she said softly. But I don't have anywhere else to go. I don't have money or skills or family. What if I'm only here because I need you to take care of me? And what if I need you to take care of me too? Tom asked. What if this whole arrangement works because we both get something out of it? Does that make it wrong? Lisa wanted to believe him. But Rachel's words had opened up all the old wounds that David had carved into her self-esteem. How could she tell the difference between love and dependence? How could she know if her feelings were real or just gratitude dressed up as something prettier? Before she could answer, they heard the sound of a car coming up the long driveway. Tom frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone, and it was getting dark. They went to the window and saw an expensive black sedan pulling up to the house. Lisa's heart stopped when she saw the man getting out of the driver's seat. Tom stepped out into the cold evening air, his boots crunching on the gravel driveway. The man getting out of the black sedan looked exactly like what Lisa had described. Wealthy, polished, and used to getting his way. Everything about him, from his expensive coat to his perfectly styled hair, screamed money and control. You must be Tom Wilson, David said, extending his hand with a practiced smile. I'm David Rodriguez. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Tom didn't take the offered hand. I don't have anything that belongs to you, and you're trespassing on private property. David's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Come now, let's be civilized about this. I'm just here to collect my girlfriend. She's been going through a difficult time, and her family is very worried about her. Her family? Tom kept his voice level, but inside he was furious. Funny, she told me she didn't have any family. Linda has a tendency to exaggerate when she's upset. She ran off during a lover's quarrel, and I've been searching for her ever since. I just want to make sure she's safe. The way David said Linda's name made Tom's skin crawl, like he owned it, owned her. Well, you can see she's safe, Tom said, so you can get back in your car and leave. David chuckled as if Tom had said something amusing. I'm afraid it's not that simple. You see, Linda took some things when she left. Important things. I need to speak with her about returning them. What kind of things? Financial documents, credit cards, some jewelry that belonged to my grandmother. David's tone was reasonable, but Tom could hear the threat underneath. I'm sure it was just an oversight on her part. She was quite upset when she left. Tom knew David was lying. Lisa had arrived with nothing but the clothes on her back and an old car that barely ran. But more than that, he could see through the man's polished exterior to the controlling manipulator underneath. Even if that were true, Tom said carefully, it would be between you and her. You can't just show up and demand to take her anywhere. Actually, I can. David reached into his coat and pulled out his phone, showing Tom a photo. This is Linda's signature on our joint lease agreement. She's legally required to fulfill the terms of our contract, which includes shared financial responsibilities. If she doesn't come back willingly, I'll be forced to pursue legal action for breach of contract and theft. Tom stared at the phone screen, trying to read the legal document displayed there. It looked official, full of complicated language that he didn't understand. But he knew enough about manipulative people to recognize a trap when he saw one. Let me get this straight, Tom said. You're threatening to sue her for leaving you. I'm trying to resolve this situation amicably, David replied. But if Linda continues to hide from her responsibilities, I'll have no choice but to involve the authorities. Credit card fraud is a serious crime, Mr. Wilson. I'd hate for her to face criminal charges over what could be a simple misunderstanding. The threat was clear, and Tom felt his anger building. This man had driven Lisa to run across the country in the middle of winter, had terrorized her to the point where she was afraid to use her real name, and now he was standing here acting like the victim. "You know what I think?" Tom said, stepping closer. "I think you're a controlling piece of garbage who can't handle the fact that his girlfriend got smart enough to leave him. And I think you can take your threats and your fake legal documents and get the hell off my property." David's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the anger underneath. "Be very careful, Mr. Wilson. You don't know who you're dealing with." "Neither, do you?" Inside the house, Lisa was watching the confrontation through the window, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. She could see Tom and David talking, but she couldn't hear what they were saying. David looked calm and reasonable, the way he always did when he was manipulating someone. Tom looked angry but controlled. She knew she should go outside, should face David herself instead of hiding behind Tom like a coward. But the thought of being that close to David again, of seeing his face and hearing his voice, made her feel sick. The conversation outside was getting more heated. Lisa could see Tom's posture becoming more aggressive, his hands clenched into fists. David remained perfectly still, but she knew that stillness. It meant he was planning something. Suddenly, David pulled something out of his coat. For a terrifying moment, Lisa thought it might be a weapon, but it was just his phone, and he was showing Tom something on the screen. Whatever it was made Tom step back, his expression changing from anger to something that looked like confusion or concern. David said something else, gesturing toward the house, and Tom turned to look back at the windows where Lisa was standing. She ducked away from the window, her mind racing. What had David shown him? What lies had he told to make Tom look at her like that? A few minutes later, she heard the front door open. Tom came inside alone, but his expression was troubled. "Where is he?" Lisa asked. "Gone. For now." Tom sat down, heavily in his chair, running his hands through his hair. "Lisa, we need to talk." The words every woman dreaded hearing. Lisa felt her stomach drop as she sat down across from him, trying to read his expression. "What did he tell you?" "He showed me some documents. A lease agreement with your signature, credit card statements, bank records." Tom looked up at her, his eyes sad. "Is it true that you're legally tied to him financially?" Lisa felt the familiar shame wash over her. "It's complicated." That's not an answer. She took a deep breath, knowing that this conversation could end everything between them. "When I lived with David, he convinced me to put my name on a lot of things. The apartment lease, joint credit cards, a car loan. He said it would help build my credit, help us plan for the future. But he controlled everything. The credit cards were in my name, but I never saw the bills. The lease was joint, but he chose the apartment and paid the rent. I thought it meant we were building a life together, but really it just meant he had another way to control me." Tom was quiet for a long moment. "Did you take any of his money when you left?" "No." Lisa's voice was firm. "I had about $800 saved from the part-time job I was allowed to have. That's what I used to buy gas and food on the drive here. I didn't take anything that belonged to him. But the credit cards are maxed out from things he bought. I never used them. He just put my name on them, so if anything went wrong, I'd be responsible for the debt." Lisa felt tears starting to build. "Tom, I know how this looks. I know it seems like I'm some kind of criminal running from my debts, but I swear to you, I never stole anything from him." Tom studied her face, and Lisa could see him trying to decide whether to believe her. The fact that he had to think about it hurt worse than she'd expected. "I believe you," he said finally. "But Linda, this is serious. If he has legal documents with your signature—" "I know." Lisa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "That's why I ran instead of just breaking up with him like a normal person. He made sure I couldn't leave without facing financial ruin or criminal charges. There has to be something we can do. Some way to fight this." Lisa shook her head. "David has money and lawyers and connections. I have nothing. That's how he planned it. They sat in silence for a few minutes, both lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the windows and reminding them how isolated they were out here. He'll be back, Lisa said quietly. David doesn't give up when he wants something, and he wants me back under his control. Then we'll be ready for him. Lisa looked up, surprised by the determination in Tom's voice. Tom, you don't understand. He's not just going to knock on the door again. He'll find ways to make my life miserable, to force me to come back to him. He might even try to have me arrested. Let him try. Tom's jaw was set in a way that reminded Lisa he wasn't just a gentle rancher. He was a man who'd spent his life dealing with difficult situations and dangerous animals. I've got lawyers too, and I've got something he doesn't have. What's that? The truth, and people who care more about doing what's right than what's profitable. Over the next few days, Tom made good on his promise. He called his lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia who specialized in domestic abuse cases. He contacted the local sheriff and filed a report about David's harassment. He even reached out to a private investigator of his own to look into David's background and business dealings. But, most importantly, he never once made Lisa feel like she was a burden or a problem to be solved. You know, he said one morning as they sat drinking coffee and waiting for Patricia to call back with news, I've been thinking about what Rachel said, about you lying to me. Lisa tensed. They hadn't talked about his sister's accusations since that awful phone call. And, she asked, and I realized she was wrong. You didn't lie to me about anything that mattered. I lied about my name. You protected yourself the only way you knew how. That's not the same thing as lying. Tom reached across the table and took her hand. Linda, Lisa, whatever you want to be called. You're the same person who's been taking care of this house and taking care of me for the past month. Your name doesn't change who you are. But what if Rachel was right about the other stuff? What if I am just using you? Tom squeezed her hand. Are you?